end whenever you're ready to call the meeting to order.
Thank you. I'm just having a few minor technical difficulties here and trying to make sure my agenda. Let's see. Can you pull? Let's see. Let me unmute. Mute. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I see we have Treasurer Reed and Secretary Clarno here and Director Walker. I am ready to begin. I'm not sure. I don't have a mallet with me, so I will just say I am pleased to begin the December 8th, 2020 meeting of the Oregon Land Board via Zoom video, audio today. I think it's our first meeting via Zoom. So Director Walker, we are formally opening the meeting.
All right, thank you, Governor and members of the Land Board. Appreciate everyone being here today. We have a big agenda with basically one item. So we'll get started. The first item on our agenda is the consent item for approval of the minutes of the October 13, 2020 State Land Board meeting.
Do I have a motion for approval?
Madam Chair, I move approval of the minutes.
Treasurer Reed moves approval of the minutes of the October 13th, 2020 Land Board meeting. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Secretary Clarno, for that second. Hearing and seeing no objection, so approved.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to the big matter at hand then, agenda item 2. This has been a long time coming. Basically, what we're asking today, the issue for decision in front of you today is, should the draft Elliott State Research Forest proposal be finalized and preparations made for final action to transfer ownership and management responsibilities of the forest to Oregon State University? The authorities are set out below in agenda item 2. And I have some talking points I need to run through today. Then we will hear from Oregon State University Provost Ed Fazer and Team Tom DeLuca. And then we will hear from the Elliott State Forest Advisory Committee panel. We have several members that would like to speak. Then I will come back and give you a summary of the comments that we've received in writing and throughout. And then we'll go into public testimony. And then the land board discussion is scheduled for around 12:30. And we hope to conclude today by 1 o'clock. I'll have 2 very short items under other that will just take about 2 minutes. So with that, I'll get started. It's my pleasure, my absolute pleasure to be before you today on this project, discussing the proposal Oregon State University has put forward for land board consideration. I'll start off by providing some background on the decisions and work that brought us here, and then OSU will present their forest proposal. After that, you'll hear perspectives on the proposal, as I mentioned, from the advisory committee and from public feedback. So let me give you the background. For many years, the Elliott State Forest has been at the center of very passionate conversations. The Elliott is important to Oregonians for many different reasons. Our great challenge has been finding a future for the Elliott that reflects those diverse perspectives and priorities. From those passionate conversations, a path forward emerged. First, with the Land Board's 2017 decision to keep the Elliott publicly owned. In December 2018, the Land Board put us on the path that led to today by directing the department to explore the viability of an Elliott State Research Forest with Oregon State University. It was a big agenda item, and I think we've done well. That exploratory process was guided by the Land Board's vision for the forest, which includes the following: keeping the forest publicly owned with public access, decoupling the forest from the Common School Fund and compensating the fund for the forest, continuing habitat conservation planning to protect species and allow for harvest, and providing for multiple forest benefits, including recreation, education, and working forest research. For the last 2 years, the department and Oregon State University, guided by many, have explored, developed, and refined the research forest idea. In 2019, we focused on the hard work of determining whether the Elliott was even suited to becoming a research forest. Was there agreement at high level on the big picture pieces? Could a research forest achieve the Land Board's vision for the Elliott? And could a research forest meet OSU's scientific needs? All those were very important questions to answer. OSU established an exploratory committee within its College of Forestry to assess the feasibility of a research forest. Likewise, DSL convened an advisory committee of stakeholders with different perspectives to provide insight on elements of a potential research forest. DSL and OSU also talked with many Oregonians about the research forest idea during open houses, listening sessions, and other events. Many of those were in public when we started, and then when the pandemic hit, those have all become virtual. In December of 2019, the Land Board heard from OSU and stakeholders that the exploratory process had been successful in identifying a pathway forward and work toward a research forest needed to continue. With the Land Board's direction to bring forward a proposal by the end of the year, here today, work in 2020 focused on 3 critical components that are needed in order to address the Land Board's vision, while also ensuring the long-term viability and success of an Elliott State Research Forest. The first critical component is managing the forest to support flexible research and objectives, while also providing those benefits of a public forest, such as public access, recreation opportunities, conservation of at-risk species, harvest, and other contributions to local economies, and partnerships or opportunities with tribal governments. 2, ensuring public accountability and transparency of forest management decisions made by OSU into the future. 3, developing a conceptual approach for sustainably financing long-term management of the forest and its research program without additional appropriation of public dollars after the forest is decoupled from the Common School Fund. And here is a look at what we've achieved. Allie will put that up on the screen for you. I won't recite them all, but what we've achieved is significant. Key to these accomplishments was hundreds of hours of work by members of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee who have provided feedback and guidance to Oregon State University and DSL as the proposal was developed for Land Board consideration. And our incredible staff here at the department, Malia Masiba, Jeff Huntington, Allie Ryan Hansen, Ryan Singleton, Bill Ryan, and our terrific support staff have made this all happen. While not all the advisory committee recommendations are reflected in the proposal submitted for Land Board consideration, the process was highly collaborative and extremely productive. You will hear from members of the advisory committee later in the meeting, and I will also provide an overview of the remaining steps needed to carry this work to completion, because we are not done here today, should that be the land board's direction going forward. But now it's time to hear the proposal. Joining us from Oregon State University are Provost Ed Fazer and College of Forestry Dean Tom DeLuca. I have been continually impressed by how Tom has listened and responded to the many hopes Oregonians hold for the future of the Elliott. And there's one particular passage in Dean DeLuca's introduction to the proposal that sang to me. And I'm always looking for things that sing to me and have meaning. And you delivered, Tom. Let me quote. Forestry must accept its role and responsibility in managing forests for the good of people and the environments upon which they depend. The responsibility is not a small task. People demand many values of their forests, including clean water and air, habitat for species to thrive and survive, climate regulation, places to recreate and gain the benefits of time in nature, and yes, fiber production. The Elliott State Research Forest represents an enormous and unique opportunity to apply science to sustainably provide its myriad values and guide and inform forest management everywhere in an ethical and life-sustaining manner. Later in the meeting, you're going to hear more about how these many values are evident in the feedback we heard the draft proposal. I know Tom will also speak to how the proposal he's presenting today addresses feedback from Oregonians. So with that introduction, I welcome Provost Ed Fazer and Dean Tom DeLuca, and the floor and the video is all yours.
All right, thank you, Director Walker, and good morning, Governor. Good morning, Treasurer Reed and Secretary Clarno, and everyone who's here today. I'm Ed Fazer, Provost and Executive Vice President of Oregon State, and glad to offer just a couple of remarks and then turn it over to Tom DeLuca. We believe that Oregon is uniquely positioned with access to the Elliott State Forest to generate advanced approaches to balancing habitat protection, recreational use, and timber production for the long-term benefit of Oregonians. We think an Elliott State Research Forest is a tremendous opportunity. And as the state's land-grant university with one of the top colleges of forestry in the world with much expertise in forest management and research, we're very excited to be at the table here with the Land Board, DSL, and other stakeholders in potentially creating an extraordinarily impactful resource for Oregon that serves people, communities, the environment, and the Oregon economy. We're convinced that with appropriate management and financial support, the Elliott offers the scale and diversity of landscape that is necessary to rigorously study alternative approaches to forest practices that will lead us to a sustainable future. And it's worth emphasizing that no other state has an 82,000 acre research forest that's capable of doing work at this scale and diversity with this kind of research and practice need. So the Elliott is clearly an opportunity for Oregon, and I want to also emphasize and just be clear at the outset that there are obviously significant risks that need to be addressed if OSU is able to move forward with the proposal we'll talk about today, and we've outlined those in the proposal. This is new and different territory, and there's a tremendous amount of work, as Director Walker said, that led up to this point. There's still some important questions to answer and work to be done, the creation of a forest management plan, refining and balancing the financial plan, seeking the OSU board's approval, and so on. But I just want to emphasize this morning that even with all of that subsequent work we still need to do, we're very excited to be a partner in this effort. We thank you for your trust in our ability to lead in the creation with many other partners of this proposal. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dean Tom DeLuca to take you through this proposal developed by the College of Forestry.
Great, thank you, Ed. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And just let me know if everybody can see that. Is that visible? Great, thank you, Treasurer Reed. Good morning, Governor Brown, Treasurer Reed, and Secretary Clarno. I'm Tom DeLuca. I'm the Dean of the College of Forestry at Oregon State University. And I'd like to thank Director Walker for the very nice introductory remarks and the opportunity to present to you today and share with you this proposal for a future Elliott State research forest. Before I begin, let me just take a moment and ask that we all acknowledge the history of the people that lived in the places where we are all located, given that we're zooming in from different parts of the state. I'm joining from Corvallis, Oregon, which is located in the traditional homeland of the Marys River or Ampinifu Band of the Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Treaty of 1855, the Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. Also, one other thing I'd like to do before I jump into the vision here for the research forest is just acknowledge some folks, because as Director Walker and Provost Fazer have already mentioned, an enormous amount of work has gone into bringing this proposal to you today. And this was a large joint effort by a large group of folks, including the College of Forestry's Exploratory Committee, which is made up of faculty and staff from within the college, along with, of course, the DSL Stakeholder Advisory Committee, members of the DSL staff, and of course, Oregon Consensus, which worked together tirelessly to bring this proposal forward. And it was a long and involved process that first involved building trust between members of the Exploratory Committee and extending that trust in working with us. And I just want to acknowledge and just state my really genuine appreciation for all the work that has gone into getting us to this point today. So, yes, our society is at a crossroads. We face really significant threats in the form of climate change, species extinction, pollution, and population growth. And underpinning all of this is a consumption crisis that's driven by society as a whole and propped up by our ever-growing population. We cannot continue to consume products and expect to not produce those regionally or locally. Oregon is uniquely suited to the production of wood resources, and we need to focus on producing wood here in this part of the world and produce it sustainably and provide our region with the only renewable structural building material available. But we have to meet our resource needs while minimizing our impact to the environment. We have to take into account climate change. We have to take into account biodiversity, and we have to integrate these efforts when we're managing, rather than managing strictly from a revenue perspective. When we establish the Elliott State Research Forest, it'll allow us to answer a number of questions or address a number of questions related to resource sustainability, such as, what is the role of forestry in mitigating climate change? What's the best way to protect and restore our endangered species? What's the best way to manage for multiple objectives, including recreation, biodiversity, timber resources, cultural amenities, and do this in one package? How can we support economic growth and development in rural communities? And how do we meet society's ever-increasing demand for building products, and specifically forest products, without exporting our environmental footprint somewhere else? We can't load our resource demands into other parts of the world, such as the tropics, and not expect major species extinction problems there, which especially in parts of the world where environmental regulations aren't as strict as they are here. So the Elliott State Research Forest allows us to address these issues and allows us in this capacity to serve all Oregonians. These are just some examples of the outcomes that would be achieved by instituting this research plan. The effort in the way it's been structured and put forward will address critical climate action by storing carbon. The forest will sequester 60,000 metric tons of CO2 annually, both in the reserves and in the managed portions of the watershed, which I'll discuss later. It will create the largest single forest reserve on the Oregon coast at a large block reserve of 34,000 acres. It increases the acreage of older forests, of forests over 100 years old, by 50% by the year 2070. And it supports local economies by providing about 17 million board feet of timber annually. But these are just the activities that will influence outcomes on the forest as it exists with this implementation of the plan. Some additional implementation effects will be protecting all fish-bearing streams and 84% of non-fish-bearing streams. It'll protect critical habitat for a number of endangered species, allows for continued public access for recreation, with limitations only around those areas temporarily blocked off for management or with sensitive research equipment or activities. Serves school children of Oregon by creating a dedicated landmark for teaching of forest ecology and management, as well as other aspects of the forest and outdoors and recreation. The only way to generate this critical knowledge for a more sustainable Oregon and for Oregon to thrive is through research. I do want to emphasize that those are the impacts that will occur on the forest. The long-term impacts of conducting this research will influence the way timber is managed and forests are managed throughout the region. So it transforms, even though this is only an 82,000 acre parcel on which those effects are taking place, the research should inform management decisions over time that will change the way we manage forests and create a more sustainable future and allow us to delist species and potentially delist species while achieving a consistent flow of timber resource to our economies. So how did we get here? The Elliott State Research Forest proposal was developed and refined through a collaborative practice. And this was accomplished by a diverse array of scientists, stakeholders, and members of the public. This included local community members through listening sessions that were held in 2019, engagement with local tribal nations, involvement of stakeholders around recreation, conservation, education, and timber. The DSL Stakeholder Advisory Committee, which again was deeply involved, and members would describe this as spending almost all of their time on the Elliott, especially as we neared closer to completion of this proposal. The science advisory panel members that helped advise the dean, myself, on the strength of the science in the proposal, and then the OSU Exploratory Committee members, which are scientists and staff members from within the college, and then a variety of experts, both inside and outside of the university, that have helped inform this process. So with this help, OSU has developed a proposal that's now in front of you that's consistent with the Land Board's mission that Director Walker referred to earlier, that includes public ownership and access, complete decoupling from the Common School Fund, continued habitat conservation planning, and a working forest for local and community benefit. So the question is where does OSU come into this picture? Well, we believe that the Elliott, as I've said already, will inform conservation and management decisions into the future that will help protect endangered species, mitigate climate change, and meet resource demand and engage the public in science, recreation, education that supports an informed democracy. This 82,000 acres will help transform the management of millions of acres moving into the future. Some proposal details that I'll share briefly here, but are in great detail in the proposal, are including these guiding principles that were established by OSU in cooperation with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And this included guiding principles on forest governance, conservation, recreation, educational partnerships, local and regional economies, and tribal partnerships. Just some examples of the College of Forestry's commitments to these public values, which again are spelled out in detail in the proposal. But these commitments are based around the good for the good of the science, the land, and the people. We commit to managing the forest as a publicly owned forest and guaranteeing public access restricted only in those cases of sensitive scientific experimentation or ongoing, temporary restrictions for ongoing timber harvest activity. Transparency and accountability, providing local jobs and other economic values, conserving, enhancing, and sustaining high-quality habitats, with over 60% of the forest in some type of long-term permanent reserve. Continued involvement of the tribes in research, management, and education. The proposal, the layout of the research proposal, which I'm going to share shortly, is a landscape scale design. We were asked to create a template upon which the whole forest research project could be laid out for our stakeholders to engage with, for our science advisory panel to be able to engage with, to be able to look at what this would look like moving into the future. And so we had to have a proposal that laid out the full use of the landscape so that we'd have a sense of the acreage involved in different activities. And within this template that we call the Triad Research Platform, there is a number of different research activities that are embedded into the design, and there is innumerable opportunities for additional research activities as nested studies within this overarching design. Just some examples of the type of research that's embedded into the platform. First and foremost, carbon cycling and climate change mitigation research. And then working forests that sustain economic growth within the region and beyond. Biodiversity and at-risk species that would be studied in great detail with this platform. Riparian and aquatic ecosystems. Water and air quality, resilience to different disturbances, including fire, landslides, and windstorms, socioeconomic and cultural aspects of the forest and forest policy, and forest stand structure, both early successional stands and old growth, just to name a few. So now to just lay out the research design really briefly. The forest would be the northwestern portion of the forest, which is shown here in dark green, would be put into a permanent conservation reserve. This large block reserve of 34,000 acres would receive no timber harvest activity with the exception of conservation-oriented thinnings that would be conducted on existing plantations. I should note that about 40% of this portion of the forest is in some type, had been in some type of intensive management and exists in stands that are 65 years old or younger. And those stands would receive treatments to put them on a trajectory to achieve the structural complexity and function similar to that of the mature stands that make up the other 60% of the conservation reserve watershed. This establishment of this large block 34,000 acre reserve would be immediately across the Umpqua from the Devil's Staircase wilderness, which would create a total of a 66,000 acre large block reserve. And again, the largest in the coastal range. Over time, the forest will age up and will create more mature timber and more mature forests. In 50 years, about 60,000 acres or 73% of the forest will be older than 100 years, an almost 50% increase in the number of older forests today. Today, we have a bimodal distribution of forest ages with a portion at 120 years up to 170 years, and the other portion at 65 years and younger. And this approach would create a significantly larger percentage of mature forests in that 100-year and older category in just 50 years. Now, the southeastern portion of the forest is shown here in this multicolored patchwork of sub-watersheds, is the research watershed or the managed research watersheds. And these sub-watersheds have a variety of treatments that are applied across this area, and they are described in a little detail in the proposal. But just to do a really quick run through of what this application looks like, let's take a look here at this grouping on the far right. These are the reserve with intensive treatments. And in these green watersheds, these bright green watersheds, the forest, the portion of the forest within that sub-watershed that receives intensive or plantation stand management would be 50%. And that would be managed on a 60-year rotation with conducting very good forestry and intensive management strategy. The other 50% would be put into reserve, or equivalent amount of land would be put into reserve status within that same watershed. So we would be yielding 50% of the total maximum productivity of that sub-watershed as intensive management. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is the extensive or ecological forest treatments. Those would be these orange watersheds, and they would receive 100% of the area treated would receive extensive or ecological forest management strategies that would be something between 20 and 80% variable retention harvesting aimed at achieving many of the ecological objectives of a reserve stand while achieving the timber volume and high quality timber. And then the triad E and I are variable allocations of extensive, intensive, and reserve on both the pink and the blue watersheds. So the net result is that we wind up with intensive stand management on a portion of the forest that would be a continuation of plantation management on those watersheds. So it would not be taking mature watersheds and putting them, or forests, and putting them into intensive. It's a continuation of plantation management. And the extensive would be applied across the gamut and would be geared towards achieving structural complexity and function. And that we would, in those cases where extensive treatments are applied on more mature forests, we would use very high rates of retention, such as 80% retention, minimizing impacts to mature stands. And then reserve stands, of course, being the existing structural complexity and ecological function of those reserve conditions. This means that we end up with 60%, 65% of the whole forest in some type of long-term reserve, either the large block permanent reserve or the distributed permanent reserves within the different sub-watersheds. Then 18% is in intensive management, and 17% is in extensive management or ecological forestry practices. The annual harvest volume that would be achieved would be about 735 acres per year. So that means about 1% of the Elliott State Research Forest would be harvested on an annual basis, with a portion of that being in that the thinnings in the former plantations in the conservation reserve. So after 20 years, there would be less than 1% of the forest being harvested annually. So when you look at those orange, green, or pink sub-watersheds, you have to recognize that only portions of those are managed at any one time. It's not as though the whole thing is goes directly into that management immediately. It ends up being phased in over time. In terms of marbled murrelet habitat, this is just the occupancy data from Matt Betts and others, Kim Nelson, and the Oregon Department of Forestry. And this data was used to model habitat suitability for marbled murrelets on the Elliott. And you just, the high quality habitat is in red, and the lower quality habitat being in blue. And this just demonstrates that here's our conservation reserve watershed area, and it is populated by the highest quality marbled murrelet habitat on the forest, where the managed watersheds, where we'll be doing the vast majority of the timber management research, will be within the this portion of the forest, the managed reserve research watersheds, where the habitat is not as notable. We also have an aquatic and riparian strategy that's aimed at high wood delivery potential to our riparian areas. Conventional management strategies tend to minimize the amount of large wood deposited in these riverine environs, and it's very important for aquatic species habitat, and specifically salmon. And so we have studies that will be looking at how do we ensure this high wood delivery. We also have established a thoughtful network of riparian conservation areas with 50 to 200 foot setbacks on fish-bearing and non-fish-bearing streams. And we wind up with 84% of non-fish-bearing streams receiving protection through both partial and full retention management in those basins. Shifting to governance structure, I just want to once again emphasize that OSU will, OSU would, under this proposal, would hold title to the forest and would manage it as a research forest, with the forest operations and management as a publicly accessible forest. So research and timber activity would be fully compatible with the accessibility of the forest, with the exception of those times when management is actively going on and we have to do temporary restrictions in harvesting zones or, again, with sensitive research areas. And then in terms of the advisory committees, we would continue to have a stakeholder advisory committee advising on the management of the Elliott State Research Forest. And we would have an internal research committee as well as the external science advisory panel helping advise on research decision-making within the forest. And then we have principles for transparency and accountability written into the proposal, but I have to emphasize that that is still a work in progress. That is one of those things that has been referred to as work that still needs to be done yet. In terms of the relationships on the forest, the Elliott State Research Forest Executive Director would manage a direct relationship with both would have a direct relationship with both the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and the public, and would then, of course, have the direct reporting to the dean, and the dean directly reports to the provost and president of the university. And so again, as with the principles for transparency, some of the governance structure is a piece of the proposal as a whole that is still somewhat of a work in progress. As far as the finances and financial overview of the Elliott State Research Forest proposal, the intent was for us to achieve a financially self-sufficiency as a research forest. And so what I present here is just taking the harvest revenue of $5.7 million generated annually from the 16.6 million board feet and subtracting off the management and operation costs leaves us with a net harvest revenue of about 3.4 million. If we put forward a full research package and operation package, that's was estimated at $5.5 million. So the net would have been minus 2.1 just operating on timber harvest revenue. This doesn't include alternative sources such as carbon offsetting, which is something that we've looked into in some detail and have more work to do on, but we think we could generate a significant amount of revenue on an annual basis from carbon as well that would help offset those costs. And this doesn't include startup costs in terms of if we were to build the full research facilities with full instrumentation of watersheds, with dormitories for students to be able to live on site, with a research center with laboratories and office space and conference center or conference rooms and that type of thing. That would be an upfront cost of roughly $35 million that we need to fold that into a starting package for the forest, startup package for the research forest. And this is just summarizing the timber volume and where it comes from, with about 10.6 million board feet coming from intensive and 3.9 in extensive, and 2.1 in those reserve thinnings at 16.6, and then that shifts over time, and then 736 acres or 35 acres harvested annually for the first 20 years. In terms of that full research package that I was talking about, we were fairly generous with the personnel, and this would be our ideal in terms of forest management and research staff. We have 6 professional faculty living out in the area and working on the forest, as well as technicians, grad research assistants, and internships. So we have a significant presence on the in this location, and as well as the forest management team and the executive director, communication specialist, and a group devoted to community engagement. So just to summarize, once again, it's our belief that the only way we're going to generate the knowledge needed for a sustainable Oregon moving into the future, and for Oregon to be able to thrive, is going to be through research. In the absence of science, we rely on opinion, anecdote, and conjecture, and that is not adequate. The Elliott State Research Forest would be the first landscape scale research forest capable of testing how to combine conservation and enhancement of our forest ecosystems, while sustainably providing the resources to timber resources to a growing population. With that, I'm going to just tie this up with saying that just to make clear that in addition to those research starting costs that I mentioned a moment ago, that the researchers at the Elliott, as well as on campus, would be writing grant proposals throughout that full time, and I failed to mention that. And they would augment that research enterprise with external grants, federal, state, and private. And we would also be entering into philanthropy and seeking ways to augment those costs, those revenue through philanthropy. So those are just a couple of things I left out and wanted to go back to. So again, we are really excited about this opportunity. The scale at which research could be conducted would be amazing. And the collaborative approach that got us here helps ensure that we're going to, and that will continue, will help ensure that we do this right. So with that, let me stop sharing and see if there are questions or any time or interest in questions at this point.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to my board members first to see if they have any questions. Secretary Clarno.
Yes, thank you, Governor. Have to figure out how to unmute myself here. I think I sent along a question about grants as far as financial issues, grants that we might receive for carbon sequestration, and how you've have you had any kind of success in looking at areas like that?
Yes, we've looked into the idea of selling carbon offsets on the property. It certainly makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons. Number one of the things we'd like to be able to do is demonstrate for other landowners the process and the opportunity to generate revenue through additionality in terms of carbon storage in alternative management strategies, or through putting stands into reserves. And the Elliott State Research Forest, with 65% of the forest being in reserve, makes a perfect opportunity to sell offsets on that portion, as well as the additionality associated with the extensive management that would be conducted on the managed research watershed. We've looked into it the idea of selling on the California exchange, and it is a potentially a very significant source of revenue for the forest, but it really depends on whether we enter one type of protocol or another, private protocol or public protocol, which I won't spend time on going into details on right now. But there's just a lot of uncertainty at this stage, which we would be able to enter, or if we'd enter the voluntary market. So there are absolutely opportunities on that front, Secretary Clarno, and we are looking into it, and we'll continue to look into it if we decide to move forward.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Secretary Clarno? Okay, with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Treasurer Reed for comments or questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No questions from me, just continued gratitude for the hard work that's gone into it thus far. I'm sure we'll hear from the advisory committee and perhaps some questions a little bit later, but all good for now. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Dean DeLuca, I have a couple quick questions. Number one, could you talk a little bit more about the vision for recreational access? This was a primary concern for me in sort of dealing with the transition, and would just love to hear your thoughts about what that looks like on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely, Governor Brown. Thank you. We are absolutely planning to expand the recreational opportunities on the forest. There is very few hiking trails within the forest as it currently stands, and that would be an objective that we would take on. There is also a number of opportunities for other forms of recreation using the existing road network within the forest. We intend to have the forest fully accessible for public use. And I kept saying, except in those places, I just want to make clear that when there's a temporary closure for timber activity, that will occur, and that there will be some places where we have very sensitive scientific equipment and we would restrict some access there, but the forest will be fully accessible. And, you know, we manage the McDonald-Dunn that way currently. We have one of the most popular recreational areas in the state is actually on a per capita basis is actually the McDonald-Dunn. And it only has 6% of the forest in reserves and is an actively managed forest. With the Elliott, I think there is just enormous recreational opportunities and the opportunity to study those recreational activities from a scientific perspective in terms of well-being, tourism, resources to communities, and individual health and well-being as well, among other things.
Well, I do think McDonald-Dunn from a recreational standpoint is a great example. I was down there last weekend over the holiday weekend and had an opportunity to see the forest for the first time and participate in the recreational access, and it was really amazing. So, and I honestly was blown away by the numbers, the different types of users, from runners to walkers to bikers to a lot of dog walkers. Really amazing. So, and a lot of kids, which is good.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about obviously the major issues Oregon is facing, from my perspective, include climate change and wildfire. Could you talk about how you anticipate we will be using the Elliott Research Forest to address and explore these issues that are really impacting Oregonians this very day?
Yeah, absolutely. There's great opportunities within this proposal to study climate mitigation strategies through forest management. In other words, how with different management strategies, which are the most successful at storing additional carbon below ground as well as above ground. There's, although we've done scientifically nationwide, we've done a pretty good job of determining how management strategies influence above ground carbon storage, but we haven't done nearly such a good job below ground. We have the intention of doing a thorough inventory of below ground carbon before and after treatments go in place. And so that would be an additional development, as well as isolated experiments across the forest on total respiration rates from below ground understory, as well as carbon capture by canopy and understory as photosynthesis. So we will be doing a thorough inventory on our research plots of in terms of their capacity to store carbon. And there's also other opportunities within the forest to study the large block reserve and carbon sequestration in that large block reserve with and without the and within the plantations that undergo treatments to bring those into sort of more reserve quality condition. So I think there's a number of opportunities on that front. And then with regard to fire, we recognize, I mean, the Elliott structure and composition that exists today is the product of fires of the 1800s and very extensive, and we know it has the potential to happen again. All biomass can burn and will burn at some point. We recognize that's a really significant concern for the Elliott, but it's also an opportunity to study resilience of these different treatments to fire and how these different treatments respond to fire. So over time, that might be very informative for land managers should we actually have extensive fires in the across the Elliott. It's not something we want to have happen, but it could be. And we can also do some work with the reintroduction of fire as a management tool.
Thank you. My last question, at least for you, is has there been any discussions or have you talked with other folks about opportunities for researchers both outside the state of Oregon and possibly internationally to investigate questions here on the Elliott?
Yes, thank you, Governor Brown. You know, that's something I failed to mention during my presentation. I really appreciate you bringing it up because I think this is an enormous opportunity. We are already, with even just the proposal stage, have been engaging with people from around the world that have expressed interest in this proposal and the potential to conduct research at this really significant scale in this unique and productive part of the Pacific Northwest. There are so many opportunities on the Elliott, you know, from whether it's from a geotechnical engineering perspective with the steep slopes and unstable soils to the high productivity and high biodiversity and important habitat that exists on the forest. How we manage that in the most sustainable way is going to be an attractant to individuals from around the world. And we will absolutely be planning, should this come to pass, we would be planning to engage with the international community, as OSU as a College of Forestry is highly involved in international research. And we have collaborators from overseas that would almost certainly be engaging on the Elliott. So I appreciate the call. I mean, the comment, it is something that's really important to us and something that we think is going to be really attractive about the Elliott to these international researchers.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you joining us. I don't have any further questions, Director Walker. I think I'm back to you for next speakers.
All right, thank you, Governor and members of the Land Board. And I appreciate Provost Fazer and Dean DeLuca's presentation today. I thought it was very insightful. Right now, we are going to have members of the Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee join us to share their thoughts on the proposal before the board. Before the committee begins, I wanted to sincerely thank them openly and very publicly for their involvement. We knew the future of the Elliott would depend on people coming together, putting in the long, long hours to build the trust, as was mentioned by Dean DeLuca, to build the trust needed to collaborate across diverse interests and resolve issues to ensure the Land Board's vision for Oregon would be realized. In your work together, committee, I see proof that people who feel differently about very important issues can continue to feel differently. That's okay. But you can find a way forward. And I'm hopeful that how you've worked together will light a path for resolving other hard problems for our state. It was truly marvelous to be a part of all of this. So we're going to hear from my good friend and fellow Reedsport High School graduate, Keith Temchuk, who will speak for the committee as a whole, and then various committee members will also add to that conversation. So I will turn it over to you, Mr. Temchuk.
Thank you. And Governor Brown, Treasurer Reed, Secretary of Clarno, it is a pleasure to speak to you again today. And again, as Director Walker said, I will prepare, this is a statement that we prepared from the entire board. I am here to express the strong and unanimous support of the Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee for advancing the ESRF proposal forward into its next phase. And I want to add that we are all quite proud of the work that we have done over the past 2 years. In 1913, the state of Oregon passed one of the most important pieces of legislation in the state's long history, when it declared Oregon's beaches as a public highway. Under Governor Oswald West's leadership, the state protected, in a unique and truly Oregon way, one of the greatest natural resources that the state has. It further completed that historic job in 1967 with the Oregon Beach Bill, where under Governor Tom McCall, the state protected Oregonians' access to those beaches. And minus an exploding whale or two, together those two bills have helped to define Oregon and its beaches, as well as illustrate how this state has always looked to unique solutions to protect the greater and public good. In 1971, the state did it again with the Oregon Bottle Bill. Once again, it was Governor Tom McCall leading the charge. We all know the great and beneficial impact that the Bottle Bill has had on this state and every other state that has followed Oregon's lead. And in 1977, Oregon became the first state to ban the use of aerosol sprays containing fluorocarbons. Governor Bob Straub is at the helm for that one. In 1974, the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve was established in Charleston on the South Slough of Coos Bay. The Department of State Lands was the lead agency on that project, the first of its kind in the nation. And the DSL manages the reserve with the goals of long-term research, water quality monitoring, education, and coastal stewardship. There is something truly Oregon about the South Slough Research Reserve, truly Oregon about the first fluorocarbon ban, about the Bottle Bill, and about the beach bills. And there is something truly Oregon in what an Elliott State Research Forest can become. 2 years ago, the State Land Board and Department of State Lands charged the 16 members of the advisory committee to work with the Department of State Lands and Oregon State University to develop a proposal for transferring the Elliott to OSU to use as a research forest. At that time, the Land Board asked us to adhere to 4 guiding goals: keeping the forest publicly owned with public access, continuing habitat conservation planning to protect species and allow for harvest, providing for multiple forest benefits, including recreation, education, and working forest research, and decoupling the forest from the Common School Fund, compensating the school fund for the forest, and releasing the forest from its obligation to generate revenue for schools and school children. We believe that the proposal that is before you today makes substantial progress towards each of these goals. While it is still a work in progress, it lays a foundation that will achieve meaningful research, significantly improve the ecological health of the forest, support local economies, maintain recreational opportunities and indeed expand on them, and advance the type of partnerships that will be necessary to achieve decoupling from the Common School Fund. There is much in this proposal, but we would like to highlight a few things that we believe are particularly notable. The proposed plan anticipates the following. Management of the forest will be driven by research and creates one of the largest research forests in the world. protection of the vast majority of the existing older forests, 65 years in age or older, in permanent reserves, provision of a predictable and stable source of timber across age classes for local communities and economies, creation of a 34,000 acre contiguous conservation reserve area, one of the largest reserves in the entire Oregon Coast Range, increase the age and complexity of the Elliott from its current status, where less than 1/2 of the stands are over 65 years in age, to an anticipated structure where more than 2/3 of the stands will be greater than 100 years of age by 2070. And continued public and recreational access, as well as expanded educational opportunities to be available on the forest. We believe that this proposal also lays the foundation for moving the Elliott from an era of conflict towards an era of collaboration. The Elliott State Research Forest Stakeholder Advisory Committee brought together diverse and sometimes conflicting viewpoints. It included representatives from tribes, conservation organizations, timber interests, counties, education, and recreational interests as well. Over the course of 2 years, we have met dozens of times, listened and learned from one another, worked through difficult and complex issues, and found common ground. We started from a place of conflict, and over time have developed trust, respect, and understanding. It is notable that the members of this committee have expressed interest in continuing on into the next phase. No stakeholder group got everything that they wanted in this proposal. However, we believe that interests of all stakeholders would be substantially advanced by this proposal. The Land Board did not charge us with developing a one-dimensional solution. It asked us to do something far more complex, to try and reconcile and significantly advance multiple objectives that for decades have been in conflict. After 2 years of work, we believe that the proposal before you has the potential to achieve that important mandate. There is still significant work ahead. This proposal is still a work in progress, and it will take months to complete it and provide the Land Board and the public with a complete proposal worthy of a final decision. We are entirely confident that we can achieve that goal. But it is important that the Land Board recognize that there is complex and challenging work yet to be done. This is indeed challenging work. The issues orbiting the Elliott are complex and have been wrought with conflict and indeed litigation for years. We envision a future with a new trajectory for the Elliott, one that supports world-class research on topics such as climate resiliency, imperiled species recovery, and sustainable forestry, where the Elliott significantly improves ecological health over time, and in which the Elliott provides predictable and sustainable support for local economies and amazing recreational opportunities for the many visitors that come. We greatly appreciate the work of both OSU and the DSL to develop this proposal and their support for our advisory committee. We also greatly appreciate the work of Oregon Consensus. Their strong facilitation has been an essential element of the work done to date and will continue to be a critical factor in bringing this effort to a successful final decision. The committee remains absolutely resolute to continue our work as we recognize the importance of the endeavor and are encouraged by the opportunity to bring a research forest of this magnitude to Oregon. We hope you will support our continued engagement. And finally, this. As you drive up Highway 38 immediately east of Reedsport, the Elliott State Forest will be directly on your right, just to the south of the highway. This stretch of Highway 38 between Reedsport and Drain is named the Jason Bowe Corridor in honor of the man who was the president of the Oregon Senate from 1973 to 1980. In fact, he was president of the Senate when the fluorocarbon ban was passed, and in fact, the Senate wing of the Oregon State Capitol is named for him. On a personal note, I knew Jason Bowe very well. He was an optometrist in Reedsport and for years, my eye doctor. I am confident that Director Walker knew him in this capacity as well. I am also confident that Jason Bowe would be very proud to have the corridor named for him border the Elliott State Research Forest. We are totally convinced on the advisory committee that the Oregon leaders, such as Oz West, Tom McCall, Bob Straub, and Jason Bowe, leaders on both sides of the aisle, would see the importance, the value, and the historic nature of an Elliott State Research Forest, would sit with me here today, and more importantly, would sit with the Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee and encourage the State Land Board to take something that is as potentially momentous as the bottle bill or the beach bill and make it a reality by supporting the creation of the Elliott State Research Forest. The Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee expresses their support for this plan both unanimously and fervently, and thanks you for your consideration of our comments.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate very much your comments today. And now, Governor, unless you have any particular questions, the Land Board, I'll go ahead and call on each member. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional members of the advisory committee that would like to speak.
Why don't we hold questions from the Land Board until the advisory committee is done? And I have to apologize. I've been sitting in this chair since 8:30. I need to step out for a minute. I'm going to give Treasurer Reed the gavel, which is non-existent in our Zoom room. So it's yours. I'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Next up is Paul Beck. And Paul, there you go.
Here we go. Well, Governor Brown has left, but Governor Brown, Secretary Clarno, Treasurer Reed, thank you for the opportunity to speak today in order to express my opinion about the accomplishments that the Elliott Research Forest Advisory Committee have made. It truly is an honor to be here. My name is Paul Beck. I'm a 4th generation forest dependent Oregonian and father and grandfather of the next 2 generations of the same. In theory, I'm here today representing Douglas timber operators. In reality, because of the nature of DTO's 300 members and the fact that none of them had the privilege of a 2-year-long participation in this group, my comments and observations are my own. I've been fortunate enough to spend an incredible amount of time in the Elliott, mostly in the process of appraising and managing timber sales, but also just hanging out. It's a beautiful place. And if any like me feel the Elliott is a remarkable place for recreation, resource, habitat, we can thank forestry as it is a result of planned human activity. It is truly a man-made forest. 2 years ago, the Elliott Advisory Committee, with a diverse group of 16 with often opposing viewpoints, was asked to give input to both Oregon State University and a division of state lands on how best to design and implement a state-of-the-art research forest on the Elliott. Not if, but how. Undoubtedly, you will hear public testimony after public testimony today disputing whether or not the Elliott should be placed in its entirety into a no-touch reserve on one hand, or be managed as a high timber yield industrial model forest on the other. You need to ignore both ends of this spectrum. That is not the question before you. Those ships sailed when the Land Board decided well over 2 years ago to send us down the path of an Elliott research forest. The only question before you today is whether OSU, DSL, and the advisory committee fulfilled the task you laid out. We have. That undertaking by this group of 16 was no small effort. Each of us are working professionals with full-time responsibilities. The craziness of social distancing and remote workplaces had compounded those responsibilities. Those responsibilities, our real jobs, come first. The time that each of us carved out to meet, and sometimes 3 and 4 times a week for several hours at a time, came for the most part from our private lives and families. It was not uncommon to receive emails from Bob Salinger at 3 a.m, or for Keith Timchuk to call in between fly casts on a family fishing trip on the North Umpqua. It also needs to be pointed out that in order to gain some quiet and privacy for the required Zoom meetings, Bob logged in from his family treehouse in Portland. This group of folks who shouldn't and historically haven't got along has met for 2 years because we were asked by you three to help design something that had never been done, and certainly not on this scale. While there are details, as Keith has described, some of which are large to be worked out, we have done what you asked. We 16 have debated, negotiated every single issue that is in the draft proposal. That debate and negotiation hasn't always been pleasant. It has been passionate, but most importantly, it has been honest and open, for the most part, polite. I will admit to a couple of sarcastic moments. But honesty and integrity were part of the Oregon way that Keith so eloquently touched on, and I grew up with, and it's been missing in policy discussion and decisions today. Do not be swayed to throw this good work away. When we met a year ago, there was testimony by a respected scientist that there was no scientific reason to harvest older trees. Science is about making inquiry. It's about asking questions and seeking the answers. The only reasons to not ask scientific question is that you either don't want to know the answer, or if your ego is so big, you cannot accept an answer that you do not believe is true. This group debated harvest tree age, riparian buffers, no harvest control reserves, needed species habitat, and every single detail in between. No one got everything that they wanted, but we came up with what I believe, and what I believe the 16 believe, were workable compromises. Do not be swayed at this last minute to throw out our hard work to gain agreement. There's work to be done. The school children and teachers of Oregon need to be made whole. These are Oregon's most precious resource, and we need to increase our investment in them, not reduce it. Making them whole is not a task this group is capable of doing. That will require legislation. My biggest fear is that in the legislative sausage making, the folks that are here today to testify against our efforts will continue that effort in the legislature. I would ask each of you three to not only support our effort, but to commit to providing the leadership in the legislative process to ensure that our good work remains intact. Do not let special interest groups waste what we have accomplished. Don't let politics destroy what we have built. I need to state strongly, this is not my ideal. I believe strongly that each of the 16 of us feels the same way, but we have crafted something that will work. We feel strongly enough that most of us want to continue and protect and nurture what we have begun. I would hope that you encourage, not only encourage, but mandate that. The folks at OSU that designed the research plan listened, and for that I commend them. We owed a debt to all those involved in the effort. Thank you to the committee, and I would especially like to thank Bob Salinger from Portland Audubon for his honest, point-blank input. Keith Chimchuk from Reedsport for his steady leadership. Jeff Huntington for the actual and virtual meetings over good Scotch whiskey. And maybe especially Peter Harkema and his team at Oregon Consensus for their supernatural ability to herd 16 somewhat feral cats. I will close in nearly the same way that I did a year ago. The forest-dependent communities that I was asked to represent in this effort are dying. The forest policies that control the destiny of these parts of rural Oregon are all too often based on unproven hypothesis at best and pure mythology at worst. This year's fires have proved once again that existing forest policy is failing and failing miserably. They are failing the communities and they are failing the environment. Drawing lines on maps does nothing to protect habitat or homes. We saw fires ignore those lines this year and more than any other year in the past. In Douglas County alone, we saw in one 24-hour period, tens of thousands of acres of critical owl habitat evaporate. Much was actually occupied. Some was consumed so quickly that even winged species could not escape. It is an environmental tragedy. The sorrow of a community where 109 families lost homes and everything in them is beyond describing. It's no small coincidence that the Sunday before this devastating 24 hours, the lead story in our local paper was regarding the protest and appeal by an environmental group of yet another BLM fuels reduction project. That project was contained and consumed by this fire. I know of no real science driving that appeal. You have an opportunity to create a process where we create real science that can inform public opinion and drive policy. I'm here today to say that I, the industry I represent, the communities I support, welcome this chance to have real science driving future opinion and policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate your comments, and we will move to Commissioner Melissa Cribbins.
Hi, everybody. Governor Brown, Treasurer Reed, and Secretary Clarno, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. And thank you to Keith Timchuk for the testimony of this committee. Also, Paul, I noticed you didn't thank me, so don't worry, you're going on my list. With that, this work has been really hard. I think when we sit down on something like this, there's always a fair bit of skepticism that goes into it in the beginning. And we join together because we want a solution, but the work is hard because compromise is hard. And we're better for it, but it's definitely not the easy route. The easy route is for all of us to sit in our corners and talk about what we want and refuse to give in any way. And the fact that this group of people that on any given day might agree on 3 out of 20 items has managed to come together and craft a proposal that we're all here to say that we support is significant in itself. And so I appreciate all the work that everyone has done. And I hope you realize how much work has gone into this. Years ago, not that 3 or 4 years ago, I mentioned to a federal elected official that we should do something similar to the Blue Mountain Forest Collaborative on the West Side. That, that was working and that level of compromise was impressive and that we should do something like that. And that federal elected official said to me, if you ever manage to get something like that done on the West Side, you let me know because I'll fund it. And I think he would be impressed today at the work that we've managed to finish or at least bring to you and tell you that we support. It's critical that we reach out and we find compromise on these big issues, because if we don't, we never move anything forward. There's always more questions and there's always more work that we can do. We need to remember our goal and keep the perfect from being the enemy of the good. The Elliott is such an important part of Coos and Douglas counties and of the state of Oregon generally. One of the things that my fellow committee members have had to hear me say several times is those of us that live in Coos and Douglas County are always surprised that anyone else in the state has an opinion on what we do and what goes on down here. But we do understand that the Elliott State Forest is bigger than just our counties. And possibly even bigger than the state of Oregon. This is a tremendous opportunity for Oregon to show leadership and bring together a research force that can make a difference in policies and decisions that we make for our lifetime and lifetimes that are still to come. It's important that we put our personal needs and wants aside and that we're able to come out of our corners and come up with an agreement that works for all of us. I will leave you with a quote that I have thought about a lot during this election season and something that has helped me make decisions. It's of course from President Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or whether the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by blood and sweat, and who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who actually does strive to do the deeds who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place should never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. This has been a tremendous amount of work. I respect all my committee members and the work that they've done. We haven't always agreed, but it's always been inspirational. It's always been an honor, and I would encourage the land board to support this proposal. Thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your comments. Now we'll turn to Ken McCall, representing the recreational interests. Ken, are you still with us?
Vicki, this is Peter. He was on earlier. I'll try to see if I can connect with him. Maybe we can move on to the next person, and I'll try to get him back on.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll hear from Mary Paulson then from the education interests.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Walker. Governor Brown, Treasurer Reed, and Secretary of State Clarno. Good morning. My name is Mary Paulson, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Oregon School Boards Association and a member of this task force. As you have heard and will continue to hear from my colleagues on the task force, we have spent considerable time and energy vetting the proposal from Oregon State University. I believe that OSU has taken the feedback from both the community and the task force and has crafted a very thoughtful and responsible proposal. I want to take just a minute to reiterate some of the important points of this proposal. OSU's proposal keeps the forest publicly owned. It continues habitat conservation planning. It provides for multiple benefits for Oregon residents, including recreation, jobs, and education, and creates a very unique research forest that will benefit Oregon in many, many years in the future. However, as you've heard, there are still issues that need to be finalized, including the decoupling of the Elliott Forest from the Common School Fund. Oregon Common School lands are required as a condition of their granting by our state constitution to benefit schools. Since July of 2012, harvest limitations on the Elliott has hindered the forest's ability to generate any significant revenue. Instead, for the last 8 years, the costs associated with management of the forest have come from the Common School Fund. As we all know, the state has a fiduciary responsibility to the Common School Fund and to make it whole. And the land board, as the trustees, must ensure the viability of the Common School Fund so it may continue to support all current and future Oregon students. Oregon School Board Association continues to strongly advocate for the decoupling of the Elliott State Forest and securing the remaining $121 million for the Common School Fund to be made whole. It is essential to our students that we provide a stable and adequate revenue stream now and in the future, and the Common School Fund is one of the ways Oregon pays for the education of our children. I also would like to say a few thank yous. First to Director Walker and her staff, Peter Harkema and his staff from Oregon Consensus for their outstanding work, OSU for the hours and hours and hours of work they have put into this proposal, but most importantly, a heartfelt thank you to my colleagues on the task force. You've heard of the hours and the sweat and the time that we've all put in. It's more than that, it's heart and soul. And I especially want to thank them for keeping children at the heart of the conversation. We might have been talking about the Elliott, but one of the things we were always talking about is the future of the children of Oregon. So thank you. I appreciate that very much. I would like to also thank you, the Land Board, for your thoughtful approach to finding the very right solution for the Elliott Forest. I believe the proposal before you today is the best possible solution for the decoupling the forest from the Common School Fund while still meeting the needs of Oregon citizens. And as Keith mentioned in his testimony, I believe strongly that this proposal is in line with Oregon's pioneering spirit. Thank you for the time to speak today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary. And we have located Ken. Apparently an excavator cut his internet line. So he is the telephone number that we see. So we won't be seeing Ken's lovely face, but we will be hearing from him. So Ken.
Okay, I think I'm connected. Am I there, Vicki?
Yes, you are.
Awesome. Yes, I have a nice big shiny machine out here in front of my house working on my driveway that just sliced my internet in half. Perfect timing. So comments today, Governor Brown, Secretary Clarno, Treasurer Reed. My name's Ken McCall. I'm a representative of Oregon Hunters Association and one of the recreation community reps on the Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee. So I'm happy to be here in front of you, and I'll say real quickly that I fully agree with Dean DeLuca's answer to Governor Brown about the recreation opportunities on the forest. Governor Brown, if you were hiking the trails in McDonald Forest, you were most likely within a couple hundred yards of my backyard somewhere over the previous holiday weekend. Next time around, stop by for coffee. Okay, so as long as humans have inhabited the unique place we now call Oregon, this rugged and beautiful piece of our Coast Range landscape, represented by the Elliott State Forest, has been a treasured part of our public's lands in our state. The Elliott has never been anything but public, going back through history to the various acts and pieces of congressional work that happened, presidential work over the past couple, 3 centuries. We've always been public with the Elliott. The values of keeping the Elliott public brought a rare cross-section of Oregon citizens and interest groups together. Citizens often at odds about the many viewpoints related to forests, and each with their own specific answer to the most important forest values. Amongst that group and the general public, there was and is one overriding common goal: keep this public treasure in public hands. I can speak here only for those who came after the Native American peoples who inhabited this landscape long before the so-called discovery of America. So let me add a little background in the vision and public land history of the Elliott. Oregon was admitted to the Union in 1859. Along with statehood came a federal grant to Oregon of some 3.4 million acres to support our schools. Today, about 75,000 acres of those original school grant lands remain in public ownership, making each and every acre of state public land that much more cherished by Oregonians. The Elliott is the most diverse and valuable block of those remaining Common School Fund lands granted by the visionaries from the 1800s. The formation of the Elliott dates back to the late 19th century conservation visionaries, and specifically to a true conservationist hero, President Theodore Roosevelt. President Roosevelt used the Presidential Proclamation Authority for forest reserves to set aside portions of unclaimed public lands as forest reserves. Those forest reserves are now known as America's National Forests. The final set-asides under that proclamation authority by the president were mapped out by President Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot, setting aside 16 million acres of new forest reserves effective March 2nd, 1907. President Roosevelt knew he would have to soon sign the 1907 Agricultural Appropriations Bill, which included an amendment ending the Forest Reserve Proclamation authority for the president. The amendment was authored and championed by one Senator Fulton of the great state of Oregon. President Roosevelt signed that bill 5 days later. So those hastily added acres to the National Forest System became known as the Midnight Forests, and the Siuslaw National Forest was one of those. Later, two visionaries from the next century, Oregon Governor Oswald West and Oregon State Forester Francis Elliott, masterminded a 2-decade effort to consolidate state school lands into a single block of forest ownership. That effort led to the 1929 Millicoma Exchange, trading some 70,000 acres of the Siuslaw National Forest to Oregon, which formed the core of the current Elliott State Research Forest. Other additions through the years brought us to today's Elliott shape and size. Historic uses of the Coast Range landscape and the resources by settlers generally followed the path set forth by the first inhabitants of Oregon, practicing age-old patterns of fishing, hunting, and gathering of nature's resources to simply help sustain themselves. More recently, some traditional recreation forms such as hunters and anglers, along with hiking to reach the places to do that hunting and angling, became very popular in the Elliott. As we move into the current century, there are many new and diverse forms of recreational use, and indeed a much more diverse population of Oregonians are discovering the Elliott. Many of these recreation technologies and new ideas yet to come can be accommodated on the Elliott, as Dean DeLuca mentioned. Where better than the Elliott to recreate, conduct recreation research, support our local economies, and teach future Oregonians for generations the value of forest ecology, environmental education, conservation, or simply the right to enjoy the coastal forest ecosystem. Our citizens, tourists, students, and perhaps the world have a lot to learn from the Elliott. So from the bottom of this 5th generation Oregonian's heart, I thank you all for introducing the concept of the Elliott State Forest back in 2018. Before you today is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to add to the Elliott's enduring public land legacy and join others from the last 2 centuries as 21st century's visionaries. Thank you much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate your comments. And finally, we will hear from Bob Salinger, who represented one of the conservation interests on the advisory committee.
Good afternoon, Governor Brown, Treasurer Reed, and Secretary of State Clarno. My name is Bob Salinger, and I'm the Conservation Director for the Audubon Society of Portland. I was one of 3 representatives from conservation groups that served on the advisory committee. Audubon was also one of 3 litigants on 3 lawsuits related to the Elliott over the last 15 years, and I'm hopeful today that we truly have an opportunity to move beyond an era of conflict and into an era of collaboration. I'm here today to offer Portland Audubon strong support for advancing this work into its final phase. I want to express appreciation, as others have done, for the work done by DSL, OSU, and Oregon Consensus. And I want to particularly express my thanks to the collaborative and problem-solving oriented work done by the advisory committee. I've served on a lot of advisory committees over the years, and this one, I think, brought together some of the most conflicted parties that I've seen come together. And everybody truly rolled up their sleeves and worked incredibly hard to find common ground and to find solutions and to work through problems that at the beginning, frankly, seemed intractable. I want to call out in particular my friend Paul, who's already spoken today, because Paul and I were charged, I think, with working through some of the most difficult issues. And I truly appreciate the way that he came to the table and really sat down. And I think the results are before you now. So I really want to express my appreciation to all the committee members. We've submitted extensive comments that go into more detail. I'm not going to go into that today. I'll just say that for Audubon, the North Star for the Elliott has always been achieving strong, durable protections for the Elliott's mature forests and for imperiled species like the marbled murrelet, the northern spotted owl, and coastal coho. There are many reasons to support advancing this plan today, but for us, the driver is the belief that this plan can substantially increase ecological gains. Those include protecting a nearly 35,000 acre contiguous reserve, the largest in the Coast Range. It includes protection of 93% of the Elliott's older forests, forests over 65 years in age. And the plan will result over time in a substantially older and less fragmented forest. There are many other things I could go into, but at the end of the day, we believe this plan will result in significant ecological gain. There are also things that we disagree with and dislike in this plan. I think that's true of everybody on this committee. You've already heard that. That is the nature of complex and difficult agreements. We can support this plan today based on the overall ecological lift that we believe it will achieve. We are hopeful this plan has the potential to transcend historical divisions and propel the Elliott into a new era of collaboration and consensus. As I noted earlier, we've been impressed by the manner in which this committee has proceeded and the ability to bring together historically conflicted parties. And we hope that OSU will place a premium not just on research and management, but also on nurturing those relationships. I think that's a big opportunity before us. Not only can we improve this landscape, not only can we support local economies, but we can also nurture these relationships. The Elliott can be an incubator for that, to bring together historically conflicted parties. I'll end by saying that I think it's critical that the Land Board recognize that this is still a work in progress. There's still substantial work to be done. This includes funding, decoupling, climate credits, governance, habitat conservation plan, and even some remaining outstanding issues from the research platform. We'd flag in particular the governance issues. It's critical the Elliott have adequate accountability, transparency, and enforcement mechanisms consistent with its status as a public forest. We are making substantial progress in all of these areas, but none of these issues should be taken for granted or viewed as formalities in the final phase. We all need to double down, roll up our sleeves, and continue the kind of work we've been doing to get through these issues. And we urge the Land Board to bring back a complete final package for final review, public review, and approval. We enter this final phase with the goal of bringing this process to a successful resolution. We have a lot of work ahead, and I don't want to discount that by any stretch, but I believe based on the work we have done to date, we can get there. So I urge you to move this into its next phase, and again, express my appreciation to all the people that have worked so hard on this.
Thank you, Bob. Governor, I'll turn it back over to you if members of the board wish to have questions of the advisory committee before moving on in the agenda.
I will go to Secretary Clarno. Any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Treasurer Reed.
I don't think we can say it too often, and I'm sure I'll say it again, but my great thanks to the advisory committee for really tremendous work.
I honestly, I'm blown away. I've had chills and tears from your testimony. Incredibly impressed with all of your willingness to put aside political differences and really put policies first that really benefit Oregonians, not just this generation, but the next several generations. And I cannot say thank you enough for your time, your energy, and honestly putting your heart and soul into this project. Our work is not done. We anticipate we have a number of issues we still need to resolve, but I'm incredibly grateful. And Keith, I thought maybe you got a little help from your brother in writing remarks, and then I remembered your background. You probably figured that all on your own, but really terrific, and just really appreciate the historical perspectives that you all brought in and this morning. So thank you. Really extraordinary work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor and members of the board. And yes, Reedsport High School turns out some really talented individuals, doesn't it, Keith? All right, well, I need to, at this point, provide some information before we get into the public testimony so that everyone is aware of where we're at and where we need to go. Let me say the advisory committee, as you all noted, was integral not only in guiding development of the proposal, but in helping engage the many diverse communities with varying and important perspectives on the future of the Elliott. And I want to especially thank Oregon Consensus for doing such a great job of facilitating and keeping us on task. As I mentioned earlier, conversations with many Oregonians guided us as the proposal took shape in 2019. In 2020, as the draft proposal came together, feedback was gathered in an extensive engagement process that included tribal governments, stakeholders, and the public, as well as ongoing conversations with the advisory committee. I'm also pleased to report that while some consultation with involved tribes has occurred with at least 2 tribal nations, there is more consultation pending, especially as the HCP comes into focus. In addition, representatives of 3 tribal governments have been actively involved in the advisory committee process over the last 2 years. The Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians have also provided a separate letter of support for continuing work toward the research forest vision. Their letter is included in the meeting packet as Appendix D, and I want to thank Chair Bosley for her thoughtful letter, as well as the CT Clusi's engagement throughout this process and for their commitment to continued involvement. In late October and early November, DSL and OSU collaborated to offer multiple opportunities for the public to learn about the draft research forest proposal and provide feedback. A new research forest proposal website was created. 6 events, including 2 public forums and 4 drop-in events at different times of the day, were held via Zoom in late October and early November. Feedback was received during virtual events, via online form and email, and by regular postal mail. Approximately 1,700 comments were received. A feedback summary and a link to all written comments received is in the meeting packet as Appendix C. I want to highlight a few themes, as what we heard deeply influenced the request the department is making to you today. First, some comments did not support the path we are on at all, suggesting alternatives to the Land Board's vision or re-evaluation of the research forest concept or Oregon State University's involvement. Most comments, however, were specific to the draft research forest proposal and generally highlighted a research forest potential to achieve the Land Board's vision. Commenters noted the possibilities for research on topics of great importance to Oregon and the world: enhancement of the forest's ecological health, protection of old growth, and creation of significant permanent reserve areas, recreation of all kinds, and keeping the forest owned by the people of Oregon. Comments reflected the passion Oregonians feel for distinct values within the vision and continued championing of those values. That said, the comments also acknowledged the give and take necessary to find a future for the Elliott that works for all. Finally, comments indicate more work is needed to make a research forest a reality, just as you have heard from the advisory committee today. Comments were certainly clear that more work is particularly needed to ensure public accountability and transparency, and to build trust in Oregon State University's ability to oversee a truly public forest. Comments indicated trust in OSU would need to be earned and built over time, and that development of a governance structure that ensures public accountability is absolutely critical. Ensuring OSU has sufficient capacity to complete the research forest proposal, implement the proposal, and administer and manage a forest of the Elliott's size and complexity was also noted as important. Clearly, the future of the Elliott is important to Oregonians, and comments reflected their desire for meaningful engagement should work to create a research forest continue, or even if a different path is explored. Expanding opportunities for engagement and including additional perspectives was identified as well, as was ongoing engagement with the tribes. My great thanks to the organizations and individuals who took their precious time to review the draft proposal and provide feedback. Many people shared personal and heartfelt experiences of the Elliott, illustrating again and again how special the forest is to Oregonians. So much has been accomplished toward the Elliott's future as a research forest, but as you heard, there is more work to do. Should the land board support moving forward, we will put on the screen a look at what will be needed in 2021 and beyond to successfully establish an Elliott State Research Forest. I'm not going to go through the entire timeline of future work, but as you can see, it is extensive and will continue for 18 to 24 months beyond where we are today. I'm happy to report the first portions of the riparian and terrestrial conservation measures have been submitted for discussion later this month to the federal agencies. We are on track to have the Habitat Conservation Plan out for public comment in the spring of 2021, and with final action by federal agencies by 2022. In a few moments, it will be time to hear the public testimony. Before we begin, I need to outline the department's request to the land board today so those who testify know exactly what we were asking from the board. The department is looking for the land board to confirm its intention to decouple the Elliott State Forest from the Common School Fund and transfer it to the Oregon State University for management as the Elliott State Research Forest. The department also wishes to continue its collaboration with OSU and members of the Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee to complete the work necessary to fulfill the land board's original vision and direction. Completion of this process is anticipated to include periodic progress reports to the land board and multiple opportunities for additional input from the public prior to returning to the land board for final authorization to complete the transfer. Thank you, Governor Brown, Secretary Clarno, and Treasurer Reed for your consideration of the department's request and your indulgence in allowing us to bring this proposal to you. It's now time for the public testimony. We have 14 individuals signed up to provide testimony today. When it is each individual's turn to speak, I will call their name and they will be able to unmute their microphone and have their video turned on. They will need to state their name and any organization, if any, they are representing. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. When you have 15 seconds left, a lovely bell ringing right now. A lovely bell will sound to indicate that time is almost up. And when your time is up, you will hear another bell. At that time, you will need to finish your sentence and your microphone will be muted so that we have time to hear from everyone today. So there are some benefits to the Zoom meeting. First off, I need to ask, we have one person signed up to testify who is signed up with a telephone number, so I don't know who it is. Could that person unmute and tell me who they are? Okay, All right, well, we don't know, so we'll just ask as we go along. Those of you who are signed up to testify are signed up in the order in which you signed up. So we didn't mess around with the list. Our first person on the list is Darlene Sherman. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, representing Great Old Broads for Wilderness Cascade Volcano Chapter. So Darlene, we will unmute you and allow you to present yourself on video. Okay. We're not seeing Darlene. If she comes in later, we will bring her back. Next up is Bob Van Dyke from the Wild Salmon Center, who is also a member of our advisory committee. Bob? Okay, there's Bob.
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
I did.
Yes, thank you. I was some kind of Zoom transition there. Hello, land board members. Thanks for the time to speak today. My name's Bob Van Dyke, and I'm the Oregon Policy Director for Wild Salmon Center. I'm a member of the advisory committee as well that began meeting a couple of years ago, and I'm testifying separately just to add a couple extra perspectives to those shared so far. But importantly, I want to state clearly that I endorse the common advisory committee testimony presented by Keith Timchuk. In short, I'd say keep going with OSU. It's been hard. It's always hard to do something new, but I think we're on the right track. So some perspectives to add briefly. On the riparian strategy, I've had the opportunity to work extensively with OSU and their team on the riparian strategy. I think it's going to make a positive contribution to recovery of listed coho salmon. But OSU has been very slow to provide some specific details on important parts of their strategy. And the strategies have gotten much clearer over the past 3 weeks, but there's still some work to do there. Secondly, I'd encourage you to think that you're transferring this to OSU and not the OSU College of Forestry. I encourage the land board to explore broadening the range of interests at OSU represented in the governance structure to incorporate disciplines beyond the College of Forestry. When I look at the programs at OSU, I see things like fisheries and wildlife sciences, botany and plant pathology, crop and soil science, environmental economics and policy, climate science. It's a pretty long list that goes on. And the Elliott should be a resource for all these programs rather than being too closely associated with the College of Forestry alone. Now, to be clear, I expect the College of Forestry to be in the middle of this, but I would encourage you to think more broadly as well. Lastly, I think to be successful, the land board needs to work with OSU leadership to hire a director for the Elliott who's got a position that's independent from any core academic program. And I think there's a specific set of skills you're going to need for the next couple of years to get us across the line. And those are skills that have been underrepresented in the process so far. And those are experience crafting legislation, familiarity with forest policy planning, experience working with a range of internal and external stakeholders, and familiarity with the legal framework that shapes forest management, like an HCP. So in short, I want to reiterate my thanks for the opportunity to testify. I'm optimistic about what's to come for the Elliott. It's been an enjoyable process, although difficult at times. I've really enjoyed meeting and building some new relationships with people. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. And I also want to clearly state that you're all invited out to the deck area outside my office in Portland after COVID to drink beer and eat pizza and celebrate the Elliott. So look for that in the post-vaccine future that we're all headed to. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I will put that in our calendar. Next, we will hear from Jerry Franklin.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. And on deck, just to let you know, is Francis Etherington. So, Jerry.
Hello? Am I on?
We can hear you.
Okay, well, I better just go. I don't see me.
All right, thank you.
I'm speaking today for both Norm Johnson and I. We think that this transfer to OSU represents an immense gift to Oregon State University. It's probably the largest investment that's ever been made in forest research by the citizens of Oregon. So it's very, very important. However, there's some changes that need to be made in it. The experiment that's currently proposed in OSU's proposal will not contribute to its potential. In fact, it will be a major impediment to achieving the goals of a research property important to the citizens of Oregon and the world. Its focus on triad has no relevance to the challenges that face Oregon's forests and were identified by Dr. DeLuca. The experiment does not meet the basic experimental requirements for a science credible experiment. Hence, you can't expect to get from it any definitive scientific any definitive science from it. It is really a management plan and not an experiment. The State Land Board really needs to ask OSU to go back with regards to the research specific kinds of elements that it proposes, identify those such as climate change and improved resistance to wildfire, and provide the State Land Board with a plan for the experiments that it will do that will explicitly address those kinds of concerns. Currently, their experiment appears to address everything, but really focuses on nothing. And they need to identify explicitly what they're going to do to develop that scientific information and what kind of experiments they're going to do that will be scientifically credible. Norm and I are confident that OSU can expeditiously develop such an addendum to the existing research proposal that identifies the research priorities and the nature of experiments that they're going to carry forward. And we think that it can be done within all of the agreements that have already been made between Oregon State and the various stakeholder groups. So it isn't necessary to go back and revisit anything. Again, I'd like to emphasize that what they're proposing to do purportedly with Triad has no relevance to the issues that we're really facing in forestry. And what they've proposed is not an experiment. It is, in fact, a management plan. And within that management plan, some experiments need to be identified and defined. But
thank you, Mr. Franklin. Your time is concluded. I appreciate it. If you have additional comments or those comments that you just gave to us, you can also submit those in writing. All right, we will turn to Francis Etherington.
Unmute myself. Okay, I'm here.
We can hear you. Thank you, Francis.
Sure. My name is Francis Etherington. I live in Douglas County, and I have spent a lot of time in the Elliott. You know, I support keeping the Elliott in public ownership and decoupling it from the common school funds. However, we do need to continue to work out the problems in the current proposal. And that reflects the business of the School of Forestry. Instead, you know, I agree with the previous comment that the Elliott should be given to the entire university so various departments can have equal input in management and research, such as climate scientists and wildlife biologists. If the School of Forestry's research finds a better way to clear cut or protect fisheries, what good does it do? It will not change the current industrial forest practices in Oregon unless the Oregon Forest Practices Act is changed. And that is almost impossible to do in a significant way. You know, we already have studies showing intensive forest management increases fire severity, and studies showing clear cutting further reduces summertime low flows, and studies showing clear cuts increase the number and severities of landslides. But none of that research changed anything. Only the Oregon Forest Practices Act changes forestry practices, and there is no plans to modernize that act to recognize valid and current research. Instead of forestry research, we should have climate scientists writing the management plan for the Elliott State Research Forest, as well as biologists who understands the needs of fish and wildlife. You know, some logging on the Elliott can still be appropriate, you know, like thinning in the abundant old clear cuts, the high density artificial clear cuts could use some thinning, but and that thinning could produce a lot of income in forestry products. But we should not do research on clear cutting with aerial spraying of pesticides and killing native wildlife like mountain beaver and black bears and leaving only a 50-foot buffers on most streams. You know, at the beginning of this presentation, there was a list of questions proposed that this research forest wants to answer. For instance, how do we meet the demand for wood products in the Pacific Northwest? Well, we should research a tax on whole log exports instead of research on just how to clear cut more in the intensive forest watersheds. Another question was how to economically support rural communities. Well, we should support my rural community with access to high-speed internet, not by clear cutting our drinking watersheds and spraying them with atrazine.
All right, thank you, Francis. Your time is concluded. We appreciate your testimony today. Next up, we will hear from Teresa Bird, and then after Teresa on deck is Josh Laughlin. So Teresa?
I just have to say, while the next person is coming up, I really appreciate the advocates who've been working on this issue. I started on the land board probably January of 2009, and these folks have been really consistent in their advocacy, their volunteer advocacy, and I really appreciate their voices. So it was good to see you, Francis.
Am I up?
Teresa? Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you. There you go. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Teresa. I'm here on behalf of Coast Range Forest Watch. We're a volunteer grassroots group based in Coos Bay and have spent the last 8+ years organizing community science and education on the Elliott. We also sent in written comment on behalf of 11 other local and statewide groups. And we believe that the Elliott Research Forest has potential to, as a fully public forest, provide benefits for the Elliott ecologically, to the local economy and recreation opportunities, and to the state as a whole in carbon sequestration and advancement in long-term research. We support continuing with OSU, but also believe this potential can be better achieved by OSU as a whole than by the OSU College of Forestry alone. We want to recognize all the extensive work and progress that has been completed up to this point by OSU, DSL, and the advisory committee, and that they arrived at a place of consensus around the plan's current commitments. We also want to, we see that the proposal is still incomplete and requires attention, especially to public accountability mechanisms, endangered species conservation, riparian protections funding, and a commitment to prioritizing climate change in management and the research plan. We request that the Land Board direct DSL and OSU to work out these important issues. We also request that the Land Board work with OSU to hire an executive director for the research forest and any additional experienced staff that will provide OSU with the capacity to appropriately manage public engagement processes and deadlines moving forward. and ensure that the proposal is refined and completed along with the other necessary mechanisms for memorializing OSU's commitments before a final land board decision is made to transfer the forest. We believe that these steps are necessary to ensure the work done thus far is brought to a successful finish that can benefit the Elliott and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Appreciate your comments as well. Josh Laughlin with Cascadia Wildlands, and then on deck is Fergus McLean.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
All right. Good afternoon, Governor Brown, Treasurer Reed, Secretary Clarno. My name is Josh Laughlin. I'm the Executive Director of Eugene-based Cascadia Wildlands, testifying on behalf of our 12,000 members and supporters. We've been deeply involved in Elliott State Forest policy for approximately 20 years and appreciate the opportunity to weigh in today. Our efforts over the last 2 decades have been driven largely by 2 long-term goals for the Elliott State Forest. Number one, decoupling the forest from the common school funds so we no longer have to pit school children versus the environment, a real archaic concept. And 2, durably protecting the outstanding biological diversity of this unique coastal rainforest, with a particular focus on the never before logged forests on the Elliott. We've closely followed the development of Oregon State University's proposal, which, as we understand it, is built on the premise that the forest will fully be decoupled from the Common School Fund. To do this will require an additional $121 million on top of the $100 million already allocated to the school fund. While there has not been a very clear articulation as to where this revenue will be sourced, we have been assured that the balance due will not be paid off through logging of the forest. A number of impressive conservation-minded measures are built into this proposal as we see it, including permanent protection of approximately 93% of the remaining never before logged forests on the Elliott. We're also supportive of the creation of an approximately 34,000 acre permanent reserve on the west side of the Elliott, and also recognize within the next 50 years, approximately 73% of the forest will end up in mature forest conditions, benefiting a suite of imperiled species. We see a number of outstanding issues still to be resolved and anticipate this will occur in the coming months. Number one, the riparian strategy, somewhat troubling. This remains a work in progress at the 23rd hour. Head walls and associated upper channels must have fixed buffers from logging to prevent landslides and degradation to downstream habitat. Number two, governance. The agreements, rules, and sideboards that have been developed over the past several months and which continue to be developed must be memorialized in writing, codified into a forest plan, administrative rule, or statute, and ultimately made enforceable. Number three, climate change. Since the get-go, we've had reservation about OSU's Triad research platform and have encouraged a research platform that would better help answer pressing forest management questions posed by climate change. We hope climate change and the threats it poses to our terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems will be more deeply embraced by the final plan. Recognizing there are issues still to resolve in the months ahead, Cascadia Wildlands encourages the State Land Board to advance this process and request that there be another land board meeting and vote down the road to consider approving a final Oregon State University package, thereby ensuring the remaining issues get worked out. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today and all the work that's gone into this with the disparate stakeholders. Thanks again.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate your thoughtful comments today. Fergus McLean, you're on the phone now as soon as you log in, and Bob Zyvac, you are on deck.
Can you hear me?
We can, thank you. It always takes just a couple seconds for people to log in. So thank you, Fergus.
I'm Fergus McLean, a retired forester from Dexter. It's an incredible privilege to be before this court. My particular thanks to the governor and the treasurer for setting us on this path. May we come to see the Elliott not as an administrative burden, but as an unparalleled opportunity for our state. I want to talk about two great Oregon-based leaders. The first is Dr. Jerry Franklin. I first met Dr. Franklin 25 years ago at an ecological forestry workshop in the Andrews. He told us the story of the first time an Andrews scientist ascended into the canopy of old growth, which at that time, only 35 years ago, was thought to be a biological desert. The crowd of scientists standing around looking up waited impatiently. Finally, someone shouted up, "What do you see?" And the answer came back, "It's not a desert." From those beginnings came this book, 35 years later, co-authored by Dr. Franklin, which is transforming the teaching of silviculture from an agricultural approach to one based on the management of natural ecological systems. It's taken 35 years of research, and forestry will never be the same. Likewise, Angus Duncan, arguably the creator of Oregon's climate change policy, whose 15 years leading the Global Warming Commission was capped with the 2018 Forest Carbon Accounting Project report, describing the new evidence showing adjustments in Oregon's forest practices can make her the first carbon neutral state and generate a level of excess carbon storage, which, if successfully monetized, could bring in billions in revenues if we can conduct the research to support this outcome. The advisory committee never heard from Angus, and Dr. Franklin has characterized OSU's research proposal as an outstandingly bad idea. The land board need look no further than Angus and Jerry to advise and lead the next phase of the Elliott process, building on the solid foundation Director Walker has put in place. Let me close with these comments from the director of the International Monetary Fund regarding plans for next May's Great Reset of planet Earth's human operating system. Quote, "At the IMF, we see some tremendous opportunities. First, let me talk about green growth. Governments can put in place public investment that support low carbon and climate resilient growth. These investments can lead to job-rich recovery." She's talking about us and what we can do in the Elliott. The land board has led us onto a path leading to a prosperous and healthy future based on open, thoughtful research in the Elliott. Please don't turn back now. Thank you.
Thank you, Fergus. Appreciate hearing from you. Bob Zybeck, you are up next, and David Sullivan, you are on deck. So Bob.
God, it's like shouting down a well. It's weird.
Am I on now?
Yes, you are on now. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Governor. When I first started working directly on the Elliott in 2016, it was at the request of Ted Ferrioli. I was working with Wayne Giese. He said he met with you 3 times. I think I know of 2 for sure. So we've been involved in this issue for 4 years, and with the marbled murrelet issue on the Elliott for 30 years. I've got to say one thing right out front. This is one of the few times I have agreed with Dr. Franklin. I think the current design is a management design, and I think scientifically it needs to be redesigned. When I first started working on the Elliott, Jim Paul was the director of Department of State Lands. Ed Ray was the president of Oregon State. Thomas Mannis was the dean of forestry. Dennis Richardson was the secretary of state. Ted Wheeler was the state treasurer. So we've had an entire, with the exception of you, Governor, overturn of the people that started engineering this. I've given public testimony several times, written and spoken. I represent people, Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project, Inc., a nonprofit, Northwest Maps Company, a family business, and the Advocates for School Trust Lands, a national organization that does not believe that the Elliott should be decoupled from the Common School Fund. Our interest is in local management, public access to all 550 miles of road, and a more enlightened plan. The current plan is increasing wildfire risk to the people of Reedsport, Winchester Bay, Lakeside, Hauser, Glasgow, North Bend, and Allegheny, just as the communities of Rainbow and Blue River and Detroit were damaged by wildfire this year. That should be the lesson. My PhD is in the study of historic Western Oregon wildfires. The Elliott has burned many times. It blew down in the Columbus Day storm, and the 1996 landslides changed it dramatically. So the combination of polygons and acronyms that Oregon State has come up with will likely be obliterated with a single event, whether it's wind, landslides, or fire. Those are my concerns. I think we need a more enlightened reforestation plan, one integrating traditional practices, including prescribed fire, and better selection of planting stock. Finally, I'd like to leave with a saying that's come up recently that I really like and I think represents this whole process, and that is, if you combine science with politics, you get politics. And I think that's what we've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zyback. David Sullivan, you are next, and on deck is Mark Stern. So, Mr. Sullivan?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, sir. Go
Well,
ahead.
super. I'm sorry it took a while. I'm sort of new to this. I'm going to see if I can start video so that you can see me as well. Is that working?
Yes, there you are.
Okay.
You moved around on my screen. Yes,
All
I
right.
see
Well,
you now.
super. I'm going to turn around a little bit. My name is Dave Sullivan. I'm a emeritus OSU business professor, which is just a fancy way of saying that I worked for 25 years in the College of Business and retired honorably. But I'm not here as a business professor. And what I'm doing at the moment is showing you the view from the top of my timberland, because my internet connection down at my house, which is down at the bottom of the timberland, isn't good enough to support this call. It's a beautiful, actively managed property, and I know for certain that it's quite easy to make a lot of money on managing a property like the Elliott State Forest. So I'm still not here as an active forest manager. I'm here as the president of the Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project, which was founded in the 1990s, and probably has done a better job of preserving the history and organizing educational information about the Elliott State Forest than anyone else. And what I'd like to do, if I can, is to switch things so that you can see my screen, because that's the key thing that I'm interested in doing. Are you looking at a Keep the Children's Forest screen now?
No, right now it's just your name.
Ouch, that's terrible. Because the key thing, the only real message that I wanted to give you is that along with a steering committee and a lot of other people and good help, Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project, in conjunction with Advocates for School Trust Lands, which is a national organization, has put together an extensive website called keepthechildrensforest.org. And it's really sad that I can't at least quickly show you a few of those slides. So I'm going to repeat the name again, because that's where all of this good information is. It's Keep the Children's Forest, all without spaces, no apostrophe, .org. And if you call that up, it will have a bunch of information that is not any other testimony, and represents the consensus view of a bunch of retired foresters. So I feel sad that you can't see what is the whole point of this short monologue, and I'll sign off with some sadness that wasn't available. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. All of us have received your website information, so we can look at that later. Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Mark Stern, and then Dan Burke is on deck, and then we have two other folks after that. So Mark, who also served on our advisory committee.
Thank you, Director Walker, and good afternoon, Governor Brown, Secretary Clarno, and Treasurer Reed. My name is Mark Stern. I served on the Elliott State Forest Advisory Committee. I'm also recently retired as the Forest Program Director for the Nature Conservancy. By association, serve on the committee representing conservation interests. Earlier, you heard testimony by Keith Timchuk on behalf of the committee expressing strong and unanimous support to advance the OSU proposal into its next phase. And I again reiterate my support for this proposal going forward. You also heard from members of the advisory committee today, and I much respect, appreciate, and agree with their comments and perspectives as well. And as you've heard, there's details yet to be finalized. So yes, there's still significant work to be done, and I'm confident we can get there. I have three additional points to share with you for your consideration today. One, why the Elliott? And I would say, as you know, the forests of the Oregon Coast Range, including the 82,000 acre Elliott State Forest, are among the fastest growing, most highly productive forests in all of North America. Among the many values, the Elliott offers incredible opportunity to sequester carbon and help Oregon reach its goals for reduction of greenhouse gases and achieve climate resiliency. I encourage the Land Board to in turn encourage OSU to prioritize strategies and actions that will optimize carbon sequestration on the Elliott and thereby help Oregon achieve climate resiliency. This is an incredible opportunity and should be fully considered going forward. Second, regarding process, and Director Walker spoke to this briefly a few moments ago, if you advance the proposal, and I hope you do, then I would recommend that the Land Board ask the Division of State Lands and OSU to continue to work with the advisory committee and to develop a clear and specific work plan and timeline for 21, including benchmark products and due dates, all aligned and synced up with the anticipated legislation that would codify the transfer of the Elliott to Oregon State. These deliverables should be produced in a timely manner that allows for adequate review and input by the advisory committee, and importantly allows for review and final approval by the Land Board. The third point, going forward, there are going to be various keys to success. And I think one is that OSU would benefit from committing additional staff resources commensurate with the task at hand. Bob Van Dyke mentioned this previously, encouraging inclusion of some of the other departments within the university. I would also encourage OSU to include additional faculty who have experience working with forest stakeholder advisory groups and the ability to bring forward a finalized collaborative process and product. For example, Dr. Emily Jane Davis, a member of the OSU College of Forestry Extension Program, and others would have this expertise that would greatly assist the process. So in closing, I appreciate the effort, energy, and commitment that DSL and OSU, in particular Director Walker and Dean DeLuca and their staff have put forth to date. And many thanks also to Oregon Consensus and my fellow members of the advisory committee for everybody's dedication and hard work. I look forward to the proposal going forward, and I thank you all for the opportunity to provide testimony today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. It has been a pleasure working with you on the advisory committee. Thank you for your comments. Next, we'll hear from Dan Burke, City of Elkton Mayor, and on deck is Anne Marie Oliver. So, Mr. Burke.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can, and I can see you too. There you go.
Thank you. All right, Governor Brown, Secretary of State Clarno, State Treasurer Reed. My name is Dan Burke, the current mayor with the City of Elkton, which is about 20 minutes from the Elliott via Mill Creek. We're about 40 minutes from Reedsport, where Keith is. And the Elliott basically sits on the entry that we would go to the Elliott is about halfway between Reedsport and Elkton via Highway 38 and Mill Creek. I'm a lifelong Oregonian, spent my entire life in this community. I find the Elliott State Research Forest proposal is a unique opportunity. It has so much potential for needed employment in rural communities like Elkton and Reedsport and other surrounding communities. I've followed this process for quite some time, attending various meetings to give input, from Reedsport to Roseburg to Zoom meetings. I believe this can work, but I do have concerns. On page 22, under the financial review, a key foundation of the draft that OSU presented is the Elliott State Research Forest will be financially self-sufficient as a research forest, i.e., revenue generated through the operations of the forest. With this in mind, I believe the annual operation budget should be based on the total harvest revenue and not any carbon revenue. Any carbon revenue should be placed in the interest-bearing endowment, as mentioned on page 22 at the bottom. It should not be placed in the annual operational budget. The research forest will need a stable funding resource. This will be extremely important for those managing and studying and the conservation efforts on the Elliott and those jobs created on the Elliott. Our rural communities need a long-term stable plan for the Elliott, which starts with stable funding and stable jobs. Please keep our fragile communities and those living in those communities in mind as you move forward. I thank you for all your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Burke. Appreciate your comments. And I know Elkton well. Anne Marie Oliver, you are next. And on deck is Barry Sanders. So Anne Marie. There you are.
Can you see me?
I cannot see you, but we can hear you.
I wonder how I might be seen.
I don't know unless you unclick your video.
Yes, let's try this. There we go, I think. Yes.
There you are. Perfect. Okay, there you go.
Hold on 1 second, please. Okay. Anne Marie Oliver, Oregon Institute for Creative Research. According to the website of the Department of State Lands, letters from the public, testimony by the public will be used to, quote, assist DSL and OSU in identifying areas where additional information, discussion, or consideration may be needed, unquote. Please note that I reject entirely and out of hand the notion of providing feedback on a proposal whose aims, goals, intentions, conditions, and processes must be rejected. And I oppose in no uncertain terms the very idea of logging one of the last great forests in the Pacific Northwest and the seriously compromised process that made this idea acceptable in the first place. I am one of thousands of people, make no mistake. Since I've been allotted a mere 3 minutes, I want to ask a series of questions of the people here. Seems like most of the advisory board members are not here whatsoever. They've disappeared, so they will not be getting any public comment whatsoever. Do the people gathered here today know that 360,000 acres of northern spotted owl habitat burned in the fires that swept through Oregon this past summer? Do you know that according to the Forest Service, more than half of this land will no longer be suitable for the owls and their progeny? Do you know that the marbled murrelet likes to nest in trees that are 200 years old? The single fact put forth by the Cornell Ornithology Lab should stop us all in our tracks. What does it mean when one wonders that a seabird that is also a forest bird likes to nest in trees that are 200 years old? One can only feel humbled by, and with this knowledge, one can only cry for a bird who understands history and who will die to the buzz of chainsaws. What would a college of forestry be like, I wonder, if it taught the work of people like Rachel Carson, Jane Goodall, Gaston Bachelard, a college that eschewed big timber money and instead worked with all its heart and mind and soul on saving what is left of our world, on protecting our forests, our rivers and streams from greed, malice, and sheer oblivion? Isn't that what a College of Forestry must and should be here at the end of the era of our era of so-called resources, all those magically replenishing forests that, by the way, may never grow back? The conditions are no longer amenable to dug firs. We may never see them again, nor our children. They may never exist in the entire history of the world. Do you care? What would a College of Forestry be like if the college had refused big timber money to fund the position of its dean? I'm so sorry, with all due respect, because I truly think you are a kind man, but I must ask all of you, don't you find this inappropriate, given that it means that everything that an individual thus funded says, writes, does, espouses, approves, and advocates for is de facto questionable?
Thank you, Ms. Oliver. Your time has concluded. As you know, you could have submitted written testimony and you can still do that in the future. Thank you. Mr. Sanders, you are now on the phone. As soon as you unmute, I have two people, one that I called earlier and one we did not see. When we are done with Mr. Sanders, I'll call on Darlene Sherman and Kat Stone to see if you are there. If not, then we will be concluded. So Mr. Sanders, you are on.
Am I?
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Good enough.
Thank you.
I want to talk about what this process looks like outside the political frame and my reaction to it. I am also part of the Oregon Institute for Creative Research. Since this process started some several years ago, the pressures on the environment have increased tremendously. At the time it has taken the land board to move all its pieces around, the planet has seen the two hottest years on record and the hottest temperature of all time in Death Valley at 133 degrees. Phoenix, Arizona this last year suffered 150 days over 100 degrees. In the Mojave National Forest, 1.3 million Joshua trees recently went up in flames, resulting in what a local botanist has called an extinction event. They'll never grow back. Since the advisory board began meeting, some 24 species have gone extinct. Millions of animals have been incinerated in Australia. 5.4 million acres have been sold off to oil and gas companies during this time. To go on and on. Since the first session of the advisory group, the UN has issued a report warning that we have but 20 years to reduce dramatically greenhouse gas emission and 30 years to bring it to zero. The authors include two OSU science professors whose voice I have not heard through this entire process. I wonder why that's the case. In just the last year, the Amazon rainforest was depleted, just going up in flames just to grow palm oil plants. According to the Rainforest Action Network, as many as 7 billion trees have gone up here in Oregon. In this very forward-looking, radical, and very green state, a wonder and a miracle to its earliest awakeners, Lewis and Clark, what have we been engaged in? But ways to find, pathways to devise, avenues to work out the language and to lay out habitat plans for cutting down a good portion of the state's only remaining old growth forest, still in so-called public hands. Let's get hold of ourselves. I say, let's stop. In the face of some of the worst pandemic in history, that is the human assault on the natural world, we must stop. Jane Goodall tells us that it is our mistreatment of the natural world that's created the virus. Get hold of ourselves. Realize that this is a kind of badly conceived madness and stop. We must say no to the idea that a confab of trees should be denigrated to the cold and calculating function of a laboratory. We have to see what we're doing in the context of the rest of the planet. There's nothing to find out, nothing to discover, but that we as human beings must relax, must back off, must release our hold on the natural world. Let Oregon lead. Let the Elliott Reach teach us something. Let us sit in the laboratory for a moment. Let the Elliott remain a forest and not become something manipulable and experimental. And in the end, for we all know the relationship between scientist and subject, The forest must inevitably submit to human will, and that means that utterly and eventually is expendable. It is doomed. Please.
Thank you,
and I
Mr.
assume your
Sanders.
arrogance for
Mr.
a moment to
Sanders,
speak
your
to the
time
forest.
has
Let the
concluded. I'm
Elliott be
sorry.
the Elliott.
You will be
Find the
muted.
strength and integrity to
Thank you,
give your
Mr. Sanders. All right. We have two other people that signed up. I will call your name once more. Darlene Sherman. Darlene, if you are present and wish to testify, please unmute yourself. All right. Then the last person who signed up is Kat Stone. Is Kat Stone available? All right, that is the entire list that we had, Governor. And I want to thank all of those who testified today and remind everyone that all of the written testimony that we have received is in the Land Board meeting materials on our website. And I will turn this presentation back to you at this time, Governor.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Walker. Again, appreciate all of the comments today. I know there were a couple of people that weren't able to get their full testimony in. Please feel free to submit your comments and in their entirety to the Department of State Lands. I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Clarno for questions and comments. Secretary Clarno.
Thank you, Governor Brown. I want to be sure that it's clear that the comments I'm going to make right now are not directed at OSU, the members of the Land Board, the DSL Director, or the Advisory Committee. I have received so many emails, texts, phone calls, so much correspondence about this. My comments I'm going to make are to those folks, because I know also that they will be contacting many of you and certainly the advisory committee and the stakeholders. It is my understanding that some groups are still reluctant to come to the table to resolve the right of third-party actions. In order to negotiate in good faith, everyone gives a little for the good of the success of any effort. Where there are opposing sides, but when one side holds out, it leaves a very sour taste in everyone's mouth and makes one wonder, why did I give so much to reach consensus when the other side is not willing to give an inch? And many other comments that I received about the Elliott. To me, the Elliott was created for the benefit of Oregon's children. It is short-sighted to say that the public benefit is greater than our children's education. And it is narrow-minded to think that all of Oregon's public will benefit from the diverse opportunities to share in the beauty, diversity of hiking and in the many species in the Elliott. Many Oregonians live in areas of this state where they will never get to set foot on the Elliott, but their children are suffering from the lack of school funding and the ability to benefit from the internet, which facilitates the same learning process as their city counterparts have, with the internet and abundance of educational opportunities in our cities, including OMSI, the Zoo, Oregon Historical Society, and many other learning opportunities. I think one of the comments that I got about that really made me troubled was that the fact that someone sent me a email that said every third grader will get the opportunity to go into the Elliott and learn about the various species. Well, I don't know how they plan to get someone from Joseph, Oregon in the Wallowas to the Elliott Forest, but not every child will have that same opportunity. And after many years of serving in the legislature where school funding was always a huge issue, I'm deeply saddened to realize that due to the timber wars, our children will never benefit from the millions of dollars of revenue that potentially would have been generated with our Sustainable Forest Practices Act had it been allowed to function as it was intended. Instead, millions of dollars have been spent in legal actions that has destroyed not only our ability to have future education dollars, but in addition has destroyed communities, the loss of thousands of jobs, and has aggravated an even deeper divide in urban and rural Oregon. I've never voted against anything unless I had a solution. I mean, I've never voted no. I don't have a solution. If I was in charge, I'd probably give the Elliott back to the Indian tribes to manage. They certainly could do a better job than we have done. As a matter of fact, even at my age, I wasn't here, but my ancestors came when my ancestors came. But it's my understanding from history, our earth was better off when the Indians managed everything. I do want to thank the advisory members. I was very impressed by the testimony of all the advisory members today, and I certainly was impressed with OSU's presentation. And I thank the people at DSL who've provided us all this information, and thank you, Governor, for allowing me to make my comments.
Thank you, Secretary Clarno. Treasurer Reed, any comments or questions?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'd first observe that it's perhaps fitting that as my first term as treasurer comes to an end, we're again at a crossroads on one of the first issues that I confronted as a member of the Land Board. And from the beginning of the time that I've had with this issue, I have really wanted a role for research. And it strikes me that our history, our ability to bridge rural and urban divides, our future, all of these things are tightly tied to our capacity to figure out how to do new and difficult things. I like so many others here, I'm really grateful to Oregon State University and the College of Forestry for the really significant time and energy they've devoted to helping develop this idea of a research forest. It started with President Ray and Dean Manis, and now Dean DeLuca and Provost Fazer and others. OSU has consistently stepped up to the plate. And as we've navigated this conversation, I've tried to keep a few questions in mind. For me, in the end, what it comes down to is asking how we can get past conflict and litigation on this issue and figure out what Oregonians can get out of this incredible forest beyond mismanagement and short-term thinking. From my vantage point, what we're seeing today is a real glimmer of hope. I find this proposal and the work it represents to be inspiring. I want to offer my sincere thanks to everyone who has put so much into this effort. In particular, my thanks to this amazing advisory group. My memory of your testimony when we were together in person remains vivid, and you've added to it today, in my mind, one of the very best examples of Oregon that I've ever seen. And I want to thank all of the dedicated and creative team that has continued to work so tirelessly on all the details. You've already said it. No one on this team can probably say that this is exactly the proposal they would have presented if the job had been theirs alone. But you've emerged from this process, or at least to this point, with a strong consensus and a desire to continue plugging away. That result is, to my mind, a testament to your own willingness to set your own agendas aside and work to fill in the land board's original vision. And as Mr. Salinger said, that might have models, it might be a model that has resonance to a lot of other issues that we're going to confront over time. I've reviewed a lot of the public comments, heard the testimony today, and examined the proposal. And I think I have a decent understanding of the work ahead of us. So through that lens of unfinished business, I want to point to a few areas I look forward to seeing DSL and the advisory committee address. Number one, the conservation improvements in this proposal are, to my mind, really significant, and I think they'll provide meaningful habitat protection for a number of threatened and endangered species. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the advisory committee gets to agreement on the proposal's riparian protections, which of course will be an important feature of our eventual habitat conservation plan and its approval. Number two, Oregon State University, as we've seen today and heard repeatedly, is home to talented, well-respected, and hardworking experts in fields that include forestry and a number of other fields. And I'm excited to see ways that the university might be able to bring a broad cross-section of expertise from inside and outside the university to the table on wildlife, on carbon, on climate change, and more, so the proposal can move beyond its current framework and address some of the remaining structural questions that have been raised in the public comments. Number three, it's clear to me that we've crossed a really significant milestone with this proposal. But as I look at the timelines that DSL's presented, it's also clear to me that there's a lot of work in front of us and that there needs to be more opportunity for interaction with the public who are not on the advisory committee. So I want to assure everyone that my strong expectation as one of the three members of the land board is that there will be an opportunity for Oregonians to review the entire package of proposals and provide feedback to us. And between now and then, I've encouraged DSL and OSU to continue to provide the kinds of public information sessions and opportunities that have already occurred. Number four, I know there are a lot of other issues that are outstanding and still in development. So to the extent possible, I hope we can benefit or continue to benefit from the service of the advisory committee members. My strong preference is for some form of that current advisory committee to continue as the venue for the discussions that need to occur. Hope, and we'll work to encourage the legislature to find ways to help DSL and our partners at Oregon Consensus to prioritize this work. Now, one last thing. I want to thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Secretary. This is a big deal. I'm very proud to be on this team with you. President Kennedy, we've been talking about President Roosevelt a lot today. And a long time ago, President Kennedy said in Houston that we were choosing to go to the moon, not because it was easy, hard, and because the effort and the goal would serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Southwest Oregon is obviously a lot closer than the moon, but I think we're going to learn.
Mr. Treasurer, we cannot hear you.
Uh-oh, what's happened? Let's see.
I can hear him.
Great, wonderful quote by President Kennedy.
All right, well, I'm almost done, I promise.
There you go. Now we can hear you. Can you start at the top with the quote?
Well, sure. President Kennedy a long time ago said we're going to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard, and because the effort and the goal would serve to organize our energies and our skills. And we obviously know that Southwest Oregon is not as far as the moon, but I think this effort is going to give us lessons too and develop our energies and skills that are in ways that are going to make future Oregonians better off. So that little glitch was at an unfortunate time, because that was my last comment. And Governor, whenever you're ready, I have a motion to make.
All right, thank you. Well, since we're trading quotes, I have a number of them, but I have to go to Margaret Mead first.
Oh, yes.
Never doubt the ability of a small group of committed individuals to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And so my small group of committed individuals, the advisory committee, that is all of you. And so I want to say a very heartfelt thank you for your time and energy, your willingness to put aside politics and do what's right for the people of Oregon. I think many of you said instead of crisis and chaos, we are moving towards a collective voice of collaboration, and I think that is absolutely the right path. Paul, I really appreciated your comments today. 4 years ago, roughly 4 years ago, members of the land board, of which I think Treasurer Reed, let's see, that was 2016. You were there. Secretary Clarno was not there, but we were holed up in a Salem office building and heard hours and hours of testimony. And we really didn't have consensus. And what the advisory committee has done is really brought together a diverse group of voices to drive towards the goals that the land board set. And also, frankly, a consensus for the state. And it is truly an example of the Oregon way. And I'm really, really grateful. Sorry, I just have a tickle. So thank you again. I also want to say thank you to all of the teams that helped our land board, our Department of State Lands staff, our land board assistants, our Oregon Solutions team. This wouldn't have happened with all of you. And so I'm again incredibly grateful for your time, your energy, your dedication and determination. OSU is really stepping up. And I really appreciate that leadership. I've heard that OSU has the second best forestry school in the world. I'm hoping with the Elliott, we can make it the best in the world, and to heck with Sweden. But what I would say is this, I think the work will be much better informed if the entirety of the university is brought into this conversation. It makes for a more comprehensive and collective approach, and I think that's a very good thing. Holistic is another word we use in healthcare, and given the challenges our earth is facing, given the challenges our environment is facing, given the challenge our people are facing, holistic and comprehensive, I think needs to be the approach from OSU. And so, Dean DeLuca, I really want to encourage you to reach out across the university and engage broad expertise and experience from climate science, social science, and others. Please take advantage of it. So the two other pieces, this is not a done deal by any means, but in addition to OSU, the forestry school really drawing from its depth of experience in other departments, I want to make sure that we move forward on adequate riparian protections. We faced wildfire this year, but next year it could be drought. We don't know what it's going to be. We have to absolutely preserve our riparian systems and obviously the wildlife that both exist in them and from them. The other piece, and we heard a number of folks testify, that's the accountability piece. In my mind, that is not clear how the public can be assured and have a good sense of that the outcomes are being achieved and access is being protected. And so I'd like to see some more work done there. That being said, I'm incredibly pleased and honored that we are here at this position today. And frankly, just it's some really good news out of a hell of a challenging year, to say the least. So I do want to say thank you to all of you for your participation. I made a comment to Francis and Josh and others. Many of them have been testifying either in their personal capacity or professional capacity, as far as I've been aware, for at least a decade. And I really appreciate the voices of Oregonians speaking out and working to make their communities better. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to the treasurer and ready for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the Land Board affirm its intention to decouple the Elliott State Forest from the Common School Fund and transfer management of the forest to Oregon State University for an Elliott State Research Forest. Further move that the Land Board direct the Department of State Lands to continue collaborating with OSU and members of the DSL Advisory Committee to finalize a proposal that would accomplish this outcome while fulfilling the Land Board's original vision and direction. And finally, I move that the Land Board further direct the Department of State Lands to provide opportunities for additional public input and to provide us with periodic progress reports prior to bringing the matter back to the Land Board for authorization to complete the transfer.
Treasurer Reed has made a motion. I'll see if there's a second or whether there's any opposition to the motion.
I'll second the motion.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Clarno. With Secretary Clarno's second, I am hearing and seeing no opposition to the motion. Therefore, the motion is approved. I want to say congratulations. And somebody just, my staffer, Jason Miner, just texted me another quote because we need another quote this morning. I don't know if it's a Kennedy or a more Biden, but let's give each other a chance. And I think that's exactly what we're doing this morning. Again, thank you to all of you that have assisted in this Herculean effort. And with that, Director Walker, I'm going to turn it back over to you for agenda item number 3.
Thank you, Governor Brown, Secretary Clarno, and Treasurer Reed for your direction on the Elliott project. I do look forward to working with the parties and including one of my staff members that I forgot to mention earlier, Robert Underwood. But I am anxious to continue our work with all of the parties and come back and report on our progress and hard work to create a world-renowned research forest right here in Oregon. And I agree with you, Governor, why not make OSU's College of Forestry #1? So we have direction. I will move on to agenda item 3, which is our other category. And I have 2 very quick things to share with you. One is so very exciting. We have closed on the Stevens Road land sale in Bend, Oregon to Lands Bend Corp for $22 million. I'm so excited. That deal closed on time on November 19th, and less the brokerage fees, those monies have been deposited into the Common School Fund account to help Oregon school children. So I'm delighted about that. Secondly, I wanted to report on our unclaimed property project that I mentioned at a previous hearing. In late spring of 2020, the Department of State Lands identified an opportunity to work with our vendor on a new option to return approximately $5.2 million in unclaimed funds to Oregonians. So our vendor had added a new service to match properties against public and proprietary databases to validate ownership and identify current addresses for property owners. And property is not, a lot of folks thought it meant a house or a car or land, but it's your funds and other items, stocks and bonds. Anyway, we decided that we would participate in this as a pilot project in the fall of 2020. Our staff gathered the information. We sent out we identified 17,000 properties that qualified for payment without claims. And after analyzing all of the data and whatnot, we got down to the point of sending out 10,540 letters. And that represented $3.24 million being returned to Oregonians. And the true test of this project's success is the rate at which people deposited the checks they received. And I think this is just absolutely wonderful. As of December 7th, yesterday, about 6,000 checks have been deposited by Oregonians worth $1.87 million in unclaimed property. And I know that you share, along with me, the joy this brings to people at a very difficult time in our nation's history under a pandemic and in Oregon with our wildfire season. So we will learn much from this project and look forward to launching more than just a pilot project in the future. And that's my report.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Director Walker? Great job on Stevens Road. I hope that means affordable housing in Central Oregon, which is desperately, desperately needed.
Great job on both.
Thank you. We're very proud here at the department for all of these exciting things that are happening. And I know the city of Bend is looking forward to the development of the property on Stevens Road. I remember hearing about that property when I was in the legislature, in the Senate, and I was very excited about it. So here I am as director of this agency, and now seeing this all come to fruition. It's just incredible. Thank you.
Well, unless either one of the land board members have anything else before the land board, do I see any questions or comments? I see none. This is our last meeting for the 2020 year. I want to say thank you to all of our participants, both those who spoke and those who were quiet. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please, everyone, have a delightful holiday season, and please do it without your family and friends so that you can really enjoy it next year. And with that, I will adjourn the December 8th, 2020 State Land Board meeting. Thank you to my land board members, Secretary Clarno, Treasurer Reed, Director Walker. Thanks to your team. Everyone stay safe out there and have a great day.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.